Let's see, that seems to be going okay. The delay is not up. How's it sound? Alright. I think we got it. Is that frozen? No, it's not. Alright, cool. Let's just go ahead and jump right in to this one. What the hell was I going to say? I forget. Let's just jump right in. I'm sure it'll come back to me.
You call, and then someone yet to act 3-bets. I realize this situation can go many, many ways. For example, it can go raise, call, 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 and then a 3-bet. That 3-bet can be in position or out of position. You could be the first caller or the last caller, right? There are many, many permutations of this scenario, so I'm going to give you some general tips to approach these spots. First things first, what are the ranges at play? The most important person here is going to be the 3-better, because the 3-better is the one who is applying aggression. If the 3-better is very tight, you should probably play with pretty much only hands that have good implied odds or are very likely best at the moment. If the initial, or if the 3-better is significantly looser, and you know you get to play the pot heads up because everybody else folds, let's say, then hands like ace-jack offsuit become pretty reasonable. But if it goes raise, call, 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 you call ace-jack offsuit for whatever reason, someone 3-bets, and then it goes call, 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 you should probably just fold, because then you're going to be very dominated and you're going to have a tough time playing after the flop. So you have to be very well aware of what the ranges at play are, and also how your hand will interact with those ranges after the flop. You also want to ask how many players are likely to see the flop. If you are one of the first callers, and there are, let's say, 4 other callers yet to act, it's very important for you to figure out if you're going to see the flop 5 ways or heads up. Because if you're going to see it heads up, that's fine whenever you have a big card hand. But not so fine when you have a hand that really needs implied odds, right? But if you know you're going to see it 5 ways, now the big card hands go down in value, and the hands that need implied odds go up in value because you're more likely to get it paid off in a 5-way pot than in a heads-up pot. You also want to ask, are you closing the action? If you are the last caller, you just know you get to see a flop every time. This is usually going to be when someone raises, you call, someone 3-bets, initial raiser calls, and then they're closing the action. In that scenario, you know you're not going to ever get 4-bet off of your hand, which means you get to call a little bit wider. If instead you raise, let's say, under the gun plus 1 calls, 2 other people call, someone 3-bets, you now have to call before you know what the other 3 players yet to act are going to do. And every once in a while, that under the gun caller is going to be slow playing a hand like aces or kings or queens, and then they're going to 4-bet. That's referred to as a back 4-bet. A back 4-bet would be when someone who did initially not show aggression then all of a sudden shows aggression. Whenever that happens, usually it's a pretty strong range. And when that does happen, you just have to get out of the way with your marginal-ish hands, and that's not good. You don't want to put in the call of the 3-bet preflop and then have to fold. So you want to be a little bit tighter if that may happen.
Side note, everybody knows that a back raise, meaning no aggression and then a raise and then aggression, so it's a back 3-bet or 4-bet, everybody knows that's a strong range, okay? Even very amateur new players, wow, that lawnmower is loud. They're right outside my fucking window, sorry. Everybody knows that that's a strong range. When you limp, somebody raises, and you re-raise when it gets back to you. Everybody knows it's a strong range, right? Now, modern poker theory would suggest that since everybody knows that, you should do it as a bluff. Sometimes. Truth of the matter is, it's super rare. Super rare. Like, I might play an entire, wow, it's more than a month. It's probably 80 sessions or so, which would be upwards of, if you count all the entries individually, upwards of 700 to 1,000 tournaments. And it may only be profitable to do that a few times. And typically that's only profitable on a final table when you're the big stack, out of position, with a decent hand. but really no pure bluffs. I've done it sometimes when a player has limped and I've limped behind, and there's a very aggressive player, let's say on the button, and he just raises every time. He raises every time, and then the initial limper folds, and then it comes back to me. Well, then that's a great time to play the raise as a bluff, and I've done that. In that instance, I actually had happen earlier this week, but I did have a decent hand. I had pocket sixes in the cutoff, and it was just a scenario where initial raiser, or the first position limped, low jack limped. I was on the button. I decided, you know what, I'm just going to limp. Guy in the small blind raised and did a pretty big raise, but I was the big stack, and he was super vulnerable because he was on like 40 blinds, and it folded back around to me, and I was just like, I'm tired of this guy's shit. This hand is good enough that I can jam on him. So I was kind of playing the sixes like they were eights that I had limped, but I would rarely ever do that. So I just 4-bet him, or 3-bet him from the button, and now I also have position. He's going to have to act first post flop, and he just gave it up. And from there, he stopped doing that. He stopped just raising and attacking. And when I took away his one major tool, he actually ended up bleeding out of the tournament. And that's the reason why you do it. It's kind of like if you raise from the small blind all the time and the big blind always 3-bets you. Well, then there should be a few of them where you limp and then raise their raise, because they're always going to do it. It's a method of shutdown. So I don't recommend it as a bluff because everybody knows what it's supposed to mean. But because of that, when you get played with, you are fucked. Because a raise, you called, someone 3-bet, the initial raiser folded, you 4-bet now out of nowhere. If you get 5-bet, you can just burn those cards unless they're exactly aces. You can just burn them. So it's super risky. Now, granted, that's a super low percentage, but the player who made the 3-bet, who's facing your 4-bet, you guys have to be both super deep, or you can just jam ace king or ace queen on you all day long, and you're fucked. You know what I'm saying? So I don't recommend it hardly at all. When you get into the deeper tournaments and the bigger buy-ins, like somewhere around the 55s and 100s, then it becomes kind of a profitable thing. But this is one of those ones where modern poker theory, basically, it's the same as it's always been to an extent. Whatever the other player wants you to do, don't do it. And whatever they don't want you to do that more. So if a player wants you to call, don't call. If they don't want you to raise in that scenario, raise them. You know what I'm saying? But this is one that you kind of have to let your mind realize that back raising is super strong, but you have to kind of let it go because you open yourself up, because you're usually out of position too. The example I gave where I was on the button is super specific. Okay, apparently this is happening. All right, let's go on to the next section. I just want to bring that up because I had that thought and I have integrated that move, but it's a 0.1% time that it happens. It's almost not worth knowing. You really only need it to shut down overly aggressive players.
Happen. You also want to ask what your pot odds are. If the 3-better made it tiny, you get to call way more often. If you made it huge, you have to call less often. Also, you may be getting 5, 6, 7 to 1 odds pre-flop, depending on all of the players who call. And as your pot odds go up, you get to defend with wider ranges. Let's take a look at a common spot you may encounter.
Hey, pocket sixes.
We're facing a raise to 500, low jack calls, and we have pocket sixes in the cutoff seat. This is a scenario where we are just literally always calling. Pocket sixes is a great hand to call and see the flop with. And then the dealer 3-bets to 2,000. Okay? In this scenario, unless there's a 4-bet, I'm pretty much always going to call because we're putting in 1,500 to try to win a pot immediately. That's going to go up to about, let's call it 5,000, right? So we're putting in 1,500 to win 5,000 plus an additional 10,000 in the opponent's stack, giving us about 10 to 1 implied odds. So I already know in this scenario I'm going to call if either the under the gun player or the low jack call or fold. However, if I had a suited connector, now I'm not quite getting the right implied odds to call. So now, in order for me to continue in this spot, I need one or both of these players to call, and even then it becomes like kind of dicey because we're not getting quite that 20-1 implied odds. But the nice thing about playing very multi-way is you are way more likely to get your implied odds, like realize your implied odds whenever you do call the suited connector. So I would call the suited connector or suited ace in this spot if both opponents.
That thing he said about you will get to realize your odds more often, it's because of the fact that there are 4 players in the pot. If both these players call and you call it with, you know, a 9-10 suited or, you know, an 8-9 suited, something like that, or 8-7, 6-5, whatever, you're more likely to realize your equity, meaning you're more likely to see more cards on the board and see the actual value of your hand by the river, because there's not going to be an excessive amount of betting unless 2 players just smash the board. Like if one guy hits the top pair flush draw and the other guy flops a straight or a set or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Like it has to be a very rare instance where 2 players get into a situation where they both have hands good enough to get 60 blinds in the pot. So each. So it's going to be rare. So a lot of times here, calling with the 9-10 and the 8-7, you can count on that if you're getting close, like if you're getting 17-1 instead of 20-1, even 15-1 is good, I think, in those scenarios. It's a little on the loose side, but in all honesty, you're going to just see all the way to the turn in that scenario the majority of the time for either free or for very cheap, and you may actually get all the way to the river for only one street of betting that you have to call, which initially is going to be the flop, which initially is going to come from the 3-better, which initially is only going to be called by you now out of position if the board isn't objectively bad for your range. Like if it's a middle card board, it's the C-better is going to slow down on the turn and check it, and then you may get a chance to realize your equity on the river seeing the full board. So that's what he means by when he says realize your equity, is that you're going to get a greater chance in a multi-way pot to see the full board than you are in a heads-up pot. If it's just the 2 of you heads up, then one guy can kind of smash on you with nothing really in his hand and make you fold. Just a thing to remember.
Opponents, I like to call as well. And with the pairs, I'm just always going to call in the spot. When it goes call, though, if I had a hand like ace-jack offsuit, I would definitely fold.
Yeah.
Ace-queen offsuit, I guess I'd call. Suited big card hands, I would definitely call.
The point of that, again, just to reiterate, is because when you have ace-jack offsuit, you can easily call this first raise, but the 3-bet, even with these odds, with ace-queen offsuit, if you make the ace, now what? You know what I'm saying? If it comes off ace-deuce-4, what the fuck do you do now? The only good flops for you are 2 pairs and better. Even the queen can be bad for you because you could just be up against kings or aces. It's just really a shit show. And one pair shouldn't win a 4-way pot that's been 4-bet, you know, unless you're just up against complete fucking amateur idiots. And by amateur, I mean new players, not just players who don't play professionally. So in those situations, you definitely want to have hands that their value is going to come from 3 of a kinds, like pairs, and 5-card hands like straights and flushes, you know, with suited connectors.
And then something like king, queen offsuit, I would just fold. King, jack offsuit, I would fold. So I'm not playing very many offsuit hands here at all. Post-flop playability is very, very important in these spots.
I think the only offsuit hand you really could make an argument for playing here, and I'm sure everybody can think of it, is 10-jack. Just because of a simple fact that you're going to flop a draw versus somebody with 1 pair often enough, and when you make your straight, you're going to make the nuts. But if you make a pair, you can't continue. You know, you have to do it on the straight.
And then once you see the flop, I'm just going to play pretty straightforwardly. Whenever you do see a multi-way flop, you just don't have to get all that out of line. So in this scenario, it goes check, check, check. The player on the button bets. And now, the minimum defense frequency is essentially divided among all of the players remaining in the pot. I realize this is a very, very small bet here. So minimum defense frequency is going to be quite high. But this is a hand that's just very near the bottom of our range at this point. It has very little potential. Even with a 6-high flush draw, that is not where you want to be in a multi-way pot, because if you make a flush, you could easily be beat. And if you're against a non-flush hand, that hand may just still decide to bluff you and make you fold. So this is a spot where
This is one of those ones where you get into a tricky situation when you have the king of spades in your hand, drawing, because you could be drawing dead, although you do have pure outs, like the nine of spades obviously makes you the straight flush super nuts versus the ace of spades, which only makes the nut flush. I think your defense here has to be two pair or better, and it has to be, this is one where the 10 jack gets you in a shitload of trouble. So if it's cheap, you can kind of continue and go for your full house, but you really can't do much aggression here because you can be up against ace king queens, the ace king with the ace of spades, the ace queen with the ace of spades, down Sarge. You can even be up against pocket, tens or jacks in some frequency, and you could just be drawing, pretty much dead or to one out. This is what I'm talking about. Like when you call with that offsuited hand, the 10 jack, this is the exact board that players fuck up constantly. I think my minimum defense frequency here only kicks in when I have a hand like, I was going to say king queen offsuit, but I'm not getting to this flop with that. You know what I'm saying? With the king of spades. I think in this scenario, I'm either flopping a flush or a straight, and obviously the best straight I'm flopping is probably a straight flush because I'm playing the 8-9 suited or the king-9 suited, and versus a monotone board, it's going to be very hard to play that straight confidently, especially when we never have the ace-king. This player can always just have the ace-king with the ace or king of spades and just realize they're never going to fold, especially if they have the ace of spades. Then you're just getting in with 8-9 and you're just screwed, unless you have the straight flush outs.
I already know immediately I'm just folding if someone bets. If I did have a hand like ace queen here, I would definitely go all in at this point. I would not like that, but I think that's the only reasonable option because the board's so draw heavy. We're not gonna get too deep into post flop strategy here, but
notice he didn't say ace queen with the ace of spades. He's saying any ace queen, and that's kind of correct to do here because if you don't have the ace of spades in your hand, you're more likely to get called by a hand that does have it. And the only hands that do have it that actually beat you are the ace king and pocket aces. But you're going to get called here. You're not going to get called very often, even by pocket kings with the king of spades, because they know they might only have one out or, to beat you if the flush comes. So it's kind of scary for all parties involved, but this small bet kind of tells the tale that in this scenario, I think most of the time these players, it's just not vulnerable. This is a pot builder,
I guess what I'm saying here is when you're facing this small bet, realize minimum defense frequency is kind of high, so you can't just fold pairs plus draws or like good strong made hands like top pair. But with this hand's pretty bad, so we're just going to let it go, and that's it. And this is a spot where a lot of people feel like they are screwing up. But realize we had a very, very profitable pre-flop call, right, of the initial raise. We have a very profitable pre-flop call of the 3-bet. Then the hand just didn't work out, and that's okay. The hand's not always going to work out, and realize in these scenarios we're putting in a little bit of money to try to potentially win a lot of money, and you just don't have to win a lot of money all that often to justify the call of the 3-bet.
When I was in my mid-20s, I realized that nobody ever knows what I fold. I've been playing for easily a decade, seriously. Not seriously, but enthusiastically, I'll say. I wasn't studying, but I was very observant, and I read a few books, and had moved to Vegas and was a poker dealer. So I was good, but nowhere near the study regimen that I have now. And I was a winning player, but I realized at that point, when playing these pocket pairs, is when it came to me, was that nobody knows what I have when I fold. So if I want to call pre-flop and then fold post-flop, they don't know what I'm doing. So there's no reason to get embarrassed about it. I know that seems very elementary, that nobody knows what you have when you fold. But it's an important lesson to learn and to take to heart, because that means at any point you can fold, and if it was a tough fold or it was close, nobody knows it but you. So you can just let it go. If the 3-better should have a premium range, you should fold strong high cards like ace-jack off. Yeah, I'd say that's true. Oh, I clicked false. I said true and clicked false. That's funny. Yeah, because you're dominated. Misclicked this early. if you're closing the action by calling, you should play it tighter than if there is more people left to act. Well, that's false. You can play looser because you're completing the action. Right. So if somebody, if somebody raises and you 3-bet and somebody 4-bets and it comes back around to you, you can call it a little bit wider than you could if you had 3-bets, somebody called behind, and then somebody raised. Because then when you call the 4-bet, you don't know if this guy's going to back jam. You know what I'm saying? And that's situations you can get into when the pot gets bigger, but a player can't fold a hand like pocket jacks. Now you have to give up the king, queen suited, things like that. Okay. Pretty good. Let's go on to the next one.
Now let's discuss a situation where someone raises before you and then someone else 3-bets before you. In this situation, you should be proceeding very, very cautiously. And as your stack starts to get down to about 75 big blinds or shorter, you should actually have no calling range. This is a situation that many players mess up where there's a raise and then a 3-bet. And then they think, well, if I have pocket 4s, if the initial raise was, let's say, 2.5 big blinds and then a 3-bet to 7 big blinds, I'm getting 10-1 implied odds, so I can call, right? Well, the answer is no, because some portion of the time, someone else, usually the initial raiser, is going to 4-bet, forcing you to fold. And when that happens, it just ruins.
I had this issue, and I learned this lesson in cash games when I was a poker dealer playing at the Venetian, where I was dealing most of the time I was playing most of the time rather than dealing. There really isn't much of a calling range at less than 75 big blinds when there's a bet and a 3-bet. You have to be on a table just full of schlubs. And I'm talking about comparing that to a 2006 1-2 no limit game at one of the softest, tightest casinos in Vegas, being the Venetian. I learned it there not to call those with the middle and low pocket pairs. And that was one of my first 3-bet concepts of this hand's not good enough to call, so I'm going to 4-bet it. You know what I'm saying? Rather than folding it, became the decision because we were reducing the stack to pot ratio. And usually that hand would start with the range of like queens or jacks. Tens too, depending on my position. But yeah, it's a very important thing to learn that you don't get dealt a lot of pairs, compared to the rest of the deck. But sometimes when you get dealt them, you're just fucked. So you should just give it up. Like there was a pocket jacks hand that's in a Jedi mind trick that I opened. Got raised, and then it came around to the big blind, and he 4-bet, and he 4-bet, and I was just like, well, guess I'm giving this one up. I mean, and we were 5-handed on a final table in that one, as a matter of fact, which if you look at it from a purely GTO standpoint, we're never supposed to fold there, never, but we're also never supposed to call there, so it's a jam, and I had like 50 something blinds. And it's not the exact scenario we're talking about here, but it's a good example where I was just like, nope, because of the stack sizes and the positions and all like that. I gave up the jacks and ended up seeing the call, and it was the guy on my left who had 4-bet or who had 3-bet had ace king, and the other guy who had jammed had queens. And it was one of those ones where the guy who jammed had queens, and the guy who had 3-bet had ace king, and the guy who had queens had 30 big blinds, and the guy on my left had 20 big blinds. So if I had called or rejammed, it would have been, at best case scenario, a 3-way pot where I can't win any of it unless I hit a jack. And if I hit an ace, I can even win even less. It was just fucking crazy. I think I swapped those stacks, but you know what I'm saying. So, yeah, you can just give up shit, for free. Folding for free is a big marker of discipline, and you should be very proud of the times when you fold for free and you could have gone broke.
Your implied odds. So, when there's a raise and a 3-bet before the action gets to you, you cannot profitably call with hands like suited connectors, small pairs, suited aces, medium pairs. All of these hands want to just be folded. You're usually going to find that you need to proceed with a very, very tight strategy. And that's because in this scenario, the initial raiser has whatever range they have, but the 3-better usually has a pretty strong range. So you're going to find that against early position players, you're usually only going to be able to get it in with aces, kings, queens, and perhaps ace-king. Against later position players, you get to play slightly wider ranges because usually they're raising with slightly wider ranges. But even then, you still have to proceed very cautiously because you have to risk a lot of chips in this scenario to usually win very few. Like if someone raises and someone 3-bets, if you want to 4-bet, maybe you'll make it 20 big blinds. Out of your 75 big blind stack, you really want to be putting in 20 big blinds to try to win the 10 big blind pot. And you're going to get jammed on sometimes because you're running into at least one reasonable 3-betting range most of the time. So in this scenario, you really just don't want to be bluffing all that often unless you know your opponents are also out of line. And in most small stakes games, you're going to find your opponents just are not out of line. And if your opponents are not out of line, well, then in turn, you can't get out of line. So let's take a look at...
By default, in 3 and 4-bet pots, the lower the stakes, the more linear the range. So meaning players don't get out of line when the stakes are lower and the pots are 3-bet and 4-bet, because those players like to call more, they like to flop more, they like to waste money and all like that. But they also understand the concept that when they have kings or aces, they should continue to raise so they don't get drawn out on and don't end up in a multi-way pot. It's one of the few times when small stakes plays way more GTO than mid and high stakes, because in those instances, those players are more likely to never have a 4-betting range at 100 big blinds or 5-betting range at 100 big blinds and only have a calling range with aces on a squeeze because they want to get all the money in. You know what I'm saying? At a small stakes game, those aces are getting 5-bet. It's one of the rare instances, and it's one of those things to be aware of.
A few examples of this. So in this situation, we have pocket jacks facing an under the gun raise and then a 3-bet. This is a situation where this is a very, very easy fold. We cannot properly play this hand. Many people think, oh, I can call and try to flop 3 of a kind. If you knew somehow you were never going to get 4-bet, even in that scenario, we're barely getting the proper implied odds. And the thing is, with a hand like pocket jacks, very often you're going to end up making an overpair when it comes 9-7-3, and you're going to be facing a bet. And the problem is even on 9-7-3, you're going to be against aces, kings, and queens, which you are in very bad shape against. So this is a situation where your hand's just going to play very, very poorly. We're not getting the correct implied odds, so we just have to fold. This is a spot that I think a lot of players lose a few stacks on in their career. I know I certainly have because, hey, jacks is really good, right? But this is a situation where you just have to have the discipline and fold. With ace-king, I think you can be a little bit more inclined to go ahead and put in the 4-bet. Because when you have ace-king, you block your opponent from having aces and kings. And to be fair, your line looks really strong. So maybe under the gun +1, you can make him fold out a hand like pocket jacks or 10s. So I do think it's reasonable to 4-bet the ace-king. Aces, kings, and queens, I would be...
It's an interesting one where ace-king here becomes a bluff. Because there's a raise in first, a 3-bet in second, and you 4-bet on the button to, like, let's say 20-ish big blinds. If the under the gun goes all in, I mean, unless you're at the very start of the tournament, which this is 60 blinds, you're not really at the start of the tournament. If under the gun goes all in the mid-levels of the tournament at this point, and you have 60 blinds, you should probably just fold the ace-king offsuit. Ace-king suited is a little too strong. You can definitely take the race there, but you don't love it. I'd say you're probably losing about 65-60% of the time in that scenario because of the races and the times you're up against aces and kings. And when you're off suit, you don't have enough action to combat that by making flushes and straights. So
getting it in as well. So I'm probably going to make it something like 4,000 or 3,800 in that scenario. And then if I get jammed on, I'm just going to call it off. You could take a hand like ace-queen offsuit or ace-queen suited even and use it as a 3-bet bluff to 3,800. I think that is certainly viable. Essentially using that hand as a good blocker hand. But you don't really want to use a hand like jacks as a blocker hand because you're actually not blocking aces, kings, or queens, right? Which are the most likely hands your opponents are going to...
It's a concept of jacks being unblockers in this scenario where because you have 2 jacks, you have made it far less likely that either one of your opponents has a jack in their hand. And when they don't have a jack in their hand and they like their hands, you're kind of fucked. You're either up against a bigger pair or you're up against a race at best, and you're not going to be able to put in the last bet. So making it 20 big blinds and getting jammed on by the ace-king under the gun if the guy's just really going to play at that aggro, maybe this player's a little passive but decided to raise, but he'll fold to a significant action, whatever. Or this player folds, let's say, initially, and then this one jams. You're at best case scenario coming up against a race, and you've just opened yourself up to risking a way too many blinds with the jacks pre-flop because, there's some dynamic where if it's the very start of the tournament and it's a faster structure and maybe you only start with 60 or 80 blinds, then fine. But in the vast majority of tournaments, this is never going to be a good idea for 60 blinds when everybody has 60, because that's like near the end of the registration period. Maybe it's if it's 2 hour late reg, it's maybe an hour and a half in.
Blindly get it in with. So in this scenario, we just have a very, very easy fold. Here we have another situation. Well, it's exactly what I just talked about, right? Raise 3-bet. We like to just rip it in this scenario. I think this is fine, but I think a better play is to usually make it something like 3,800, because what's going to happen in that spot is that's going to induce your opponents to bluff some portion of the time. And the thing is whenever you just rip it in, your opponents can no longer really make much of a mistake. In this scenario, if they're making a mistake if they're folding out pairs. But if I know my range in the spot is aces, kings, queens, ace, king, which I'm all happy getting in with, or a few bluffs with a hand like ace, queen, then it becomes a better spot to use a smaller 3-bet size. In this scenario, I actually have 2 players labeled as loose aggressive players. If I knew they were both loose aggressive players, maybe you could even 3-bet a hand like ace, queen suited for value or pocket jacks for value, with the idea that you're not going to fold it. But I don't think this big all-in is all that great of a play. If you look at the game theory optimal solvers in this scenario, programs that will tell you what they think is the optimal play against another very strong player, in this scenario, it probably would say ace-king offsuit is a good hand to jam it all in. And the reason is because ace-king offsuit doesn't actually play that great before the flop. I'm sorry, after the flop, but it does have very good blockers. But this is a scenario where I'm happy getting it all in this spot with a hand like ace-king, one way or the other. As my hand gets weaker, though, like ace-jack offsuit, I'm just going to fold for sure. The nice thing about using a smaller 3-bet size to something like 3,800 is that you get to bluff some portion of the time and then fold if you get jammed on. And that's something that a lot of people are very, very uncomfortable with. But I would suggest that you experiment with that, usually using the best hands that are not quite good enough to call. And in this scenario, remember, I actually have no calling range. So you're now just using the hands that have the best blockers that are not quite good enough to get it all in. And that's usually going to be ace-queen or ace-jack or king-queen. So that's what I'm going to do in this spot. I'm going to be 3-betting those some portion of the time to something like 3,800. 3-bet aces, kings, queens, jacks in this scenario because our opponents are both loose aggressive players, and fold everything else. It's also worth noting if these players were in later position, I would be slightly wider, but still not a whole lot wider. You really just don't want to get involved with too many marginal hands in this spot because, well, even in this scenario, like when under the gun raises and under the gun +1 3-bets, even if they are loose aggressive players, they're still going to have good hands some portion of the time, and even loose aggressive players know not to get too out of line from early position. So be very, very cautious in this spot. I think that will save you a lot of stacks in tournaments. It may give up a little bit of value every once in a while whenever you do fold out a hand like jacks and they had pocket 9s and 10s. But you can't look at the absolute best case scenario because quite often you're not going to be in that best case scenario. And when you're not in that best case scenario, well, you're out of the tournament.
An interesting concept here that comes up with Ace King, and the more I learn about GTO and the more I have had chances to use solvers and programs like Equilab and things like that, is that aces, kings, and ace king play almost identically in just an unbelievable amount of spots, which leads logic to say that it's never really a mistake to get it in with ace king, which is true because the stack to pot ratio is getting reduced. We're not just going to call the ace king here unless we're trying to trap one of these loose aggressive players. Like if we were trying to force a race, like if I had 30 blinds, then maybe yeah, but it's still just better just to jam it in, right? Unless you're just up against the guy like I don't know, one of the Fams or Men Win or somebody like that, like who can just do crazy shit. I really think that you should just always play the ace king as aggressively as possible. And yeah, you're going to end up versus aces and kings sometimes, but because of the removal, it's so rare. Like, if a guy has pocket aces, there's only 6 combinations of that in the deck. When you have an ace in your hand and you have a king in your hand, there's only 3 aces left in the deck, and you can only make 3 different combinations of it. So it's one of those things where, yeah, you might run into it, but a lot of times you're going to be taking a race, and there's already this money out here. So jamming in, if you get called by jacks, you've got the exact odds you wanted because of the extra money in here. You actually don't even need that much. Like, if it's 55-45, you only need there to be an extra, 5% in the middle. So if you have 12,000, the other guy has 12,000, that's 24,000. If there's another, what is that, 1,200 in the middle, you're getting the direct odds to do it. That being said, you don't always want to take those spots because of the stage of the tournament, but early stages, when you're going to re-enter anyway, sure. You know what I'm saying? I wouldn't do it if I had tripled my stack to 60 and, then I'm risking this huge, swing, and re-entering would put me at a huge disadvantage. But if this was like second or third round, or second or third level, sure. You know what I'm saying? Why not take a chance and double up? And the jacks are correct for doing the same thing in this scenario. Let's take the quiz. When closing the action multi-way plot, implied odds do not matter. That's not true. The implied odds matter when deciding your range composition. Yeah, it's just an overall thing. High unpaired cards go up in value as more players are in the pot. False. Absolutely false. They go down because you're going to be dominated, more likely to be dominated when there's more action. Multi-way pots is more likely it is to be dominated. There it is. As it becomes more difficult to realize your equity, meaning see the whole board. And your hand's strength versus the other person's hand. If the 3-better should have a premium range, you should fold strong high cards like ace queen off. I mean, not always true, but usually true. Yeah. It just goes down so much in value. I mean, ace queen for every raise in front of you, if there's a raise and a re-raise, you can start looking at that hand like ace 10, and it's like, would I play ace 10 in this position here? How would I play it? Would I play it for a raise if there was an open? You can even go as far as saying it's like ace 9 suited. Like, you can just downgrade the hand and figure out what the exact situation is. Is this the last part of this section? I think there's one more. Okay.
Now let's discuss when you are facing a pre-flop 4-bet. Now you can be facing a 4-bet in various ways, but the main one we're going to be discussing here is when someone raises, you 3-bet them, and then they 4-bet you. The other ways you can be in the spot is if someone raises, you 3-bet, and then someone else 4-bets, or if you raise, someone 3-bets, and then someone else 4-bets. Whenever you are facing a cold 4-better, someone who doesn't have money voluntarily put in the pot, and then they 4-bet you, so whenever someone raises, you 3-bet, and then someone else 4-bets, that is almost always going to be a really, really, really strong range, and you're just going to want to get out of the way with everything except for like aces, kings, queens, and ace king, and even then, queens and ace king may be okay to fold against some tighter players. So in the common spot, where someone raises, you 3-bet them, and then they 4-bet you, you're going to find that you want to proceed pretty cautiously in most small and medium stakes games because...
Side note. I used to be very proud because I was ahead of the curve with folding. And usually what it meant was, and this is back in 05, 06, usually what it meant is I would raise, get 3-bet, and fold more often than my opponents. Because I realized they were over-defending. It's 15 years later, and now I get that same sense of pride when somebody raises, I 3-bet and have a 3-bet folding range, because the ridiculous majority of people don't have a 3-bet folding range. Either A, because they're only 4-betting, or they're only 3-betting with the best possible hands, which means they're not doing it enough, or they're getting 4-bet and then over-defending based on what's already in the pot. And based on pot odds, which is the fucking worst thing you can possibly do. If you're on the button, or if you're in the cutoff with, pocket 10s and somebody in the low jack raised and you 3-bet it in the cutoff with pocket 10s and it goes back to the guy in the low jack and he 4-bets, those 10s are not looking so great anymore. And if you 3-bet properly and they 4-bet properly, you can usually just fold, because then you're just looking at a situation where it's like, well, do I 5-bet jam on this guy? And to do that, you have to know if you have equivalent deep stacks, you have to know that they're a bad player or they're just trying to race, and it has to be the right time in the tournament for that. Or you can call it and just be fucked. And that's what most players do, is they just call there because they're like, well, I have pocket tens, I have a chance. And it's just like that jack situation he was talking about, where I can play it first set. Yeah, but you're throwing away so much. If a player opens, let's say, to just 2.5, and then you're in the cutoff and you make it, 8.5, or let's say 9 big blinds, right? Fuck it, let's say 7 big blinds even, right? And it goes back around to him, and he makes it 20. Now, these are like the minimums, right? You actually should be more worried when you're seeing a minimum kind of standardized 3 and 4 bet. He makes it 20, so now you have to call 13 blinds to win the 29 out there, right? His 20 plus your 7 plus the blinds and antes and small blind. So there's 27.5 out there. It costs you 13 to call, meaning you're getting 13 to 40, right? 1.3 to 4, so not even 4 to 1. We'll call it 3 to 1 pretty much. It's close. It's a little more than that. But you're getting 3 to 1 immediately. And then, on top of that, the player has to have 7 times 13 behind for that call to be worth it, right? So this player, you're now getting 3 to 1, right? You need 10 to 1 to make the call. That player has to have 13 times what you're calling now behind. So he has, or 7 times what you're calling behind. 3 units in the middle for 13, 7 more behind means 91 blinds. So you have to be on 100 big blind stacks after the 4-bet is called, pretty much. Or you both have to have 90 blinds effective for that call to be profitable. The idea that you should get here is that is why this is such a bad scenario. Because if you think about that, then you both started the hand with 120 blinds. Okay? Then you don't really want to be 3-betting the pocket tens in the cutoff very often. Because when you get 4-bet, you're going to be playing a pot that's way too big. This is usually going to happen at the start of the tournament, sure. But there are times when you will be this deep in the middle stage of the tournament. And yes, if it works out that after you call it, the guy has 90 blinds and you have 90 blinds left, cool, you can call it. But if you both only have 60 blinds left, it's not a good call. You fucked yourself, because you're not going to win enough when you win to justify that call, and it's about long term. So that's how it works out. So not defending against the 4-bet is a great way to have an edge on your opponents, because most players defend way too much. I have had it happen where I have opened in that scenario, gotten 3-bet, 4-bet with ace king, get called, the flop comes off, jack high, and I just bet all flops because I'm betting my whole range, and the player has no fucking idea what to do, and they just fold. And I've seen players even open fold a jack to me. That happened live, where that happened, and there was this young, aggressive Japanese dude. I 4-bet him. The flop came off exactly jack high. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was jack 4 deuce. There was 1 diamond. I had the ace king offsuit with the ace of diamonds in my hand. And the flop came down. This is playing 1-2, and we were both super deep stacked. And I just bet range on the flop. And he just fucking hemmed and hawed, showed me the jack, and then mucked it away. And because he just had no idea how to continue. But here's the funny part. If he had hit the ace, I would have busted him. Like, that's the thing you got to understand when people are over defending.
Most small and medium stakes tournament players are not willing to put in a 4-bet without a very, very good hand, because if they put in, let's say, 20 or 25 big blinds out of their 75 big blind stack, they probably have something pretty good. So if they have something pretty good, you should be folding the vast majority of the time. Defending against 4-bets too often is a huge leak of most players. We're going to be discussing how to play against slightly more maniacal players in a second, but against the vast majority of players you're going to encounter, when they 4-bet you, they're just not bluffing. They have aces, kings, queens, maybe jacks, maybe tens, ace king, maybe ace queen, and maybe a few sporadic bluffs. And against that range, you just cannot continue wide. And you're going to find that implied odds hands are not getting the right odds to continue. Like if you have a pocket pair, like pocket 8s or 9s, it's just not good enough to continue and you need to fold. Same thing for suited connectors, suited aces, etc. You just have to get out of the way in these spots. So you're going to find that hands that can profitably get it all in or perhaps call against a 4-bet are going to be hands like ace-king, pocket jacks and better, maybe like ace-queen suited, maybe king-queen suited, maybe pocket 10s, maybe pocket 9s, but that is about it. You may opt to not actually have a 5-bet all-in range in this scenario, depending on what you think about your opponent's strategy, because it's quite nice to be able to call the 4-bet with a hand like pocket aces or kings, just knowing you're never folding post-flop. If you don't 5-bet those, that actually allows you to call a little bit wider because your range is protected by having aces and kings in your range that you're just never folding on the flop, right? So
doing away with the 5-bet range when playing cash online kind of made me win some huge fucking pots. I do still have it in the tournament scenario, but it's usually when I'm super deep versus somebody super deep who makes a lot of moves and we're getting close to the final table bubble or on the final table.
I think in this scenario you should be continuing with a very strong range, and sometimes you're going to want to have a 5-betting range depending on your opponent's strategy. Obviously also you want to consider the pot odds you're getting. Like if someone raises, you 3-bet. Someone raises, let's say, 3 big blinds, you 3-bet to 8. They 4-bet to 16. In that situation, you have to put in 8 big blinds more to see a 34 big blind pot, right? So will you realize 20-something% equity probably in position? Well, yeah, you probably will with a lot of hands. So definitely consider your pot odds. In the smaller stakes games, I think you're going to find that most people...
It's funny because I'm making the next Jedi Mind Trick, which by the way is the Jedi Archive, where it's just a bunch of hands that didn't really fit in anywhere with any particular theme. So I've kind of just thrown them all into this one because it's the 10th one and I wanted to use them up. There's a hand where I was in the cutoff and I raised 6-5 suited on a 6-handed table, and the big blind 3-bet me from my 2.5. He went to 5.5, and my 6-5 suited can call all day. And I said in game, I can call all day with this. Doesn't matter if he has aces. And I just so happened to flop 3-4 deuce. I flopped the absolute nuts, and we got all the money by the river. It was like a he bet. I called. The turn went check check, and the river he bet, and I over bet jammed, and of course he had pocket aces, and so he priced me into that call. If he had just made it a standard 8 big blind raise from the big blind when I opened from the cutoff, I'd have to fold, just because the price wasn't good enough. And we were both about 40 big blinds deep, so it wasn't a situation where I was looking to gamble at all. We were doing very well, and that pot got me up to 80-something blinds, which took me all the way to the final table, I think.
People 4-bet too big. Like they'll make it 3, you'll make it 8, they'll make it 30. And if they're putting in 30 in that scenario, well, now they've just completely killed any pot odds you have, so you have to fold in that scenario. So as an example in this spot,
that's a good one to do with the 4-bet bluffs. Ace queen offsuit, king queen offsuit, hands like that. Let's say you had 100 blinds, somebody opened, or you opened, and somebody 3-bet, standard. You made it 2.5, they made it 8, and then you, like he said, made it 30. You went 3.5 instead of 3, or almost 4. X their raise, or their total bet, so it's almost 4x. It's like 3.75. They're not going to continue without a super premium. So when you have 120 blinds, you can be doing shit like that with the bluffs that have blockers, because they're just not going to fucking continue with pocket 10s on down. And when they do, they're usually just going to call. Now, if you get jammed on, obviously you fold. But you're basically leveraging your whole stack without putting your whole stack in. You're putting in 30 out of your 120 or 100 big blind stack, and you're basically saying, I'm willing to go right now. And there's only a few hands people are willing to go with at that moment. So the ace queen just folds. The pocket 10s just fold. The pocket jacks just fold. Queens may call you. Ace king may jam on you. But, you have king queen in your hand. These hands are far more rare. And obviously you don't want an ace in your hand because you want them to have all the shitty aces. Ace jack, ace queen, ace 10 suited, those kind of things that will fold to the big 4-bet. It's a good move for the start of a tournament. like in the first 4 or 5 levels. It's a really strong play.
Spot. Hijack raises to 3 big blinds. You 3-bet ace queen offsuit to 9 big blinds from the button. Hijack then 4-bets to 25 big blinds. Take a second. Think about it. What do you want to do with your ace queen offsuit in this scenario?
Okay, so you raise to 3 big blinds, hijack raises to 3 big blinds. You 3-bet from the button with ace queen offsuit to 9 big blinds. From the button, the hijack bets 75 big blinds. Remember, we're talking about a 75 big blind stack or less at this point. 75 big blinds. So you're talking about putting in a 30 your chips, and we can just do the math very easily. It takes us another 16 blinds to call to win his 25 plus our 9, 34 plus blinds and antes, 36.50 plus the call. So what is that? 52.50. It costs us to win, and we have to call 16 big blinds. So we're getting 3-1 on a call, but ace queen offsuit, we've already got to put a third of our chips in. We kind of want to fold this. Like, you either want to fold or jam here, and there's very few scenarios where I want to get it all in with ace queen offsuit pre-flop, because the other opponent has made it very clear that they would absolutely like to get all the money in. Once somebody puts a third of their stack in, they're pretty much ready to go. Now, if he had raised it to 20 big blinds, that's a different story. That's actually defensible and re-raisable from the button because of your power of position and the removal in your hand. But since he made it 25, it's outside the range, man. So that's a fold to me.
Well, fold. Easy fold. So many people get a hand like ace queen or king queen or pocket tens and think, oh, I just have to put all my money in.
Pocket tens,
because,
like I said,
my hand's pretty good, but I hate to break it to you, but it's not anywhere near good enough, and you need to be folding in this spot. So do not think you want to be getting it in or even calling in this scenario against the average player, because the problem is that, like, say you do have ace queen and you decide to call, and the flop comes queen 7-3, and your opponent still wants to put in all their money. Well, you're not folding, but you still just lose to aces and kings, right? And obviously those are well within your opponent's range. And the problem is that they may not actually be stacking off with hands like jacks or tens or ace king whenever you do flop very well. Same thing if you have ace queen and it comes ace 9-3. They're probably only getting it in with ace king and aces and maybe pocket nines if they have it. So this is a spot where you just have very, very poor, well, you have no implied odds and you have reverse implied odds. And in these spots, you just want to sidestep it and get out of the way. Realize you essentially 3-bet ace queen offsuit, either for value against a passive player, like a loose passive player, but then when they 4-bet, all right, the situation's changed. They probably have a good range, so you fold. Or, really, whenever you do 3-bet a hand like ace queen offsuit or ace jack offsuit, you can get called by some worse hands before the flop. But if they turn around and 4-bet you, they probably just have something good and you need to get out of the way.
That concept of my hand is pretty good, so I'll continue. I once had a professional poker player who was a TV guy. I forget his name off the top of my head, but at the time, back in 05, 06, he was very famous. I forget his fucking name at the moment. I was trying to come up with it. But we were talking about pretty good, and he was making a joke saying the concept of pretty good makes great players go broke. And he says you can look at that in game selection and in your hand selection. He says, and the example he gave was, let's say in your town, 300 people play poker, right? And you're in the top 50 of those, right? Or I think he said 50. It might have been less, whatever it was. Let's say you're in the top 20 of all 300 poker players, right? So you're pretty good. You're a winning player. You're in the top, 8% of players in your town. If you go to a poker game where there's 3 tables and all 20 of the top poker players in the town are there and the extra seats are filled in with randos, you're no longer pretty good. You're now even or fucked versus the field. So this is a bad game selection. Same deal with hands, he said. When you're looking at a hand and going, this is pretty good so I can call, you got to realize when your brain says that, your hand is no longer pretty good. You're just gambling.
When you are against more aggressive opponents, though, you need to defend wider. And the reason is because they are going to be 4-betting you with more bluffs. Now, again, some people can play wide ranges pre-flop, but not actually 4-bet bluff very wide. But your most aggressive opponents will be able to 4-bet bluff, and for that reason, you need to adjust and defend a little bit wider. Like against a loose, aggressive 4-better, and if you have ace-queen offsuit in that scenario, you can't really fold. And you may actually should just rip it in for 75 big blinds. Just put your whole stack in. If they call, yeah, you're not going to be in great shape.
I was going to say,
they're going to fold out
that's the
all their
situation.
bluff type hands, which is great because those hands all have plenty of equity against you.
They're going to have hands like, 10 jack, queen jack, pocket nines, pocket tens, things like that they're probably going to fold when you 4-bet jam, and that's going to make the majority of their range or 5-bet jam when that comprises the majority of their range being bluffs when they 4-bet. The only legitimate hands that they're 4-betting being ace, king, aces, and kings, and queens. And even versus those, you do have a chance to win about 30% of the time with ace, queen offsuit. That being said, unless you're up against exactly aces or kings, or aces itself. Kings you even still have 30% with ace, queen off. That being said, that's the situation, the rare situation when you're up against a loose aggressive player who plays strongest pre-flop, and they're going to 4-bet more because they know about the removal of the deck, and then you 5-bet on them with your range, that 3-bets, they're going to be sitting there going, fuck. And they're going to have to throw away the pocket pairs that are actually ahead of you and actually probably should call if they knew what you were doing based on the price. But the thing is, they don't know what you're doing. Their pocket eights are no good because you could have pocket fucking queens, So that's a situation where ripping it in becomes the 5-bet move, and you're not bluffing. You're actually bluffing against their much weaker range. Or you're playing against their much weaker range, so then your range becomes stronger.
So if you did 3-bet...
As long as you don't over-adjust pre-flop. If you over-adjust pre-flop to say this guy raises more, so I'm going to re-raise more, no. But if you had a legitimate 3-betting hand versus this position, and this player is wider, and you 3-bet, and then he 4-bet, now you can go wider because of his range is comprised primarily of bluffs. So he's trying to 4-bet get you to fold. So when you jam, most of the time you just get the fold.
A loose aggressive player with a polarized range, your life will be easy, right? Just continue with the top of your range. That's usually going to be the big pairs, big suited cards, perhaps even stuff like ace-queen. Ace-jack offsuit, ace-10 suited, those hands become kind of dicey and should probably still be folded. If you use the linear range to 3-bet the loose aggressive player, you should at least consider folding a hand like ace-queen, but it's on the border. But hands like king-jack offsuit, ace-10 offsuit, the worst hands, those are definitely just folds every time. So this ace-queen offsuit hand, I know I'm kind of focusing on it because it actually is very, very close. But against someone who is actually a little bit too loose aggressive, it's probably good enough to get in. But against most people, like I said in this example, against the vast majority of the player pool, you need to fold. It's always interesting as a teacher trying to discuss a scenario that comes up because in some spots ace-queen is like an easy get in, whereas in other spots it's an easy fold. But across the board in most small and medium stakes games, if you're playing against generic players, if someone raises you 3-bet ace-queen offsuit and they 4-bet you, you're going to save a lot of money just by getting out of the way and sidestepping that very, very difficult spot. So don't think that just because you 3-bet you have to stick around and you have to see the flop or you have to go all in. That is a big mistake that costs a lot of tournament players a lot of money. When your opponent announces by 4-betting that they like their hand, well, you probably need a very, very good hand to get it in as well. And hands like pocket tens or ace-queen offsuit are usually just not quite good enough.
That's the thing. Until you're playing like 100 NL online or, 100 NL, or you're playing on a real site, not on WSOP, on ACR. On ACR, it's probably 50 NL. 100 NL on WSOP still plays super soft. Or you're playing tournament buy-ins of $100 online. I think the 4-betting ace-queen can actually go out the window because it is the great majority of the time you are going to be screwed when you've gotten 4-bet, and 5-betting or calling is just suicide versus those players because their range is so much stronger. Now, there are exceptions to that rule, like he said, But those exceptions are so rare that you could probably just make a blanket rule to say, fuck it, fold the ace queen. I tried. And get out of there for your 3-bet and just fucking move on. You know, it becomes more dicey when you get down to final tables. And players have this tendency. But even then, you can actually still make the argument for folding the ace queen as a blanket statement. Everyone folds to a normal player on the cutoff who raises to 3 big blinds out of his 70 big blind effective stack. That means we both have at least 70. You 3-bet to 10 big blinds from ace 10 suited from the small blind, very standard. Cutoff 4 bets to 24 big blinds. Okay, so this is interesting because of the raise sizes. So he's put in 24, you've put in 10. That means that there's 24, 34, 35, 36 in the middle because you're in the small blind, which was absorbed by your raise, and the big blind and antes are out there. So there's 36 in the middle, plus your call would be 14. So that makes it 50 big blinds. So you're getting 50 to 14. So what is that? That's like 10 to 3. It's like 1.5 to 5. That's like 3 to 1 almost, about 2.78 or 2.85 to 1 on the call of 10 big or of 14 big blinds. And behind, he only has 46 big blinds. Yeah, this kind of sucks because of the small raise size. You'd want to have him and you both have more chips. If you both had about 120 big blinds to start the hand, you could call here. But I honestly think this is a fold or a jam. Versus a normal player, this is just a fold. Yeah, if they were like a loose aggressive maniac, you would jam this. But yeah, this is a fold here. Yeah, it's too weak to continue versus a reasonable 4-bet range. Reasonable. That's the thing and you want to start with the most likely scenario. Yes, there are exceptions to the rule, but the rule is what you want to learn. Like my whole life, people have said, well, this could happen, well, that could happen in every scenario of life. And I've been screaming at people since I was fucking 10 years old. Yeah, but that's not the rule. That's the exception to the rule. Why are you preparing for the exception? Prepare for the rule. You know, that's the thing. The most common scenario is what you should be worried about. Everyone folds to a loose aggressive player in the low jack who raises to 3 big blinds, 70 big blinds effective. You 3-bet to 9 with ace queen suited on the button. The low jack 4-bets to 22 big blinds. This is interesting because versus a loose aggressive player, ace queen suited would be on the cusp for a call versus a normal range, but versus a loose aggressive player based on these numbers, and he did raise smaller. You know, he only went about 2.25 times your raise. This is a jam all day long. Wrong. Call. Oh, okay. I see. Okay. But it was close. You see, 46% of the time you're supposed to go all in. 9% of the time you're supposed to fold. This is based on Pio Solver, by the way. And then the rest you're supposed to call. So it's close. If you go all in, most likely better hands will call. You're strong enough to be called and played in position. Right. So if you call, you have position, you have the ace queen suited. Your hand is strong enough that you don't have to jam. The ace queen off, you would jam because that you're playing it as a 5-bet bluff. All right, cool. Because his range is already wide. You probably already have him dominated, right? He's going to have king queen a lot, king jack, queen 9, queen 10, things like that. So you're already going to have him dominated. So the strength of your hand in position is better there. From under the gun, a normal player raises to 3 big blinds, 70 big blinds effective. You 3-bet to 9 with ace jack or with ace 10 suited from the low jack. Interesting. Under the gun plus 4 bets 25. Well, he's out of position. His range is stronger. But he's out of position. So let me think about it in terms of blinds here. So 25 blinds in the middle costs us 14 to call. 25, 50 plus the blinds and antes. 52.50 cost me 16 to call. So that's 3-1 immediately. And he's got 50 big blinds behind. So that's only 6-1. Is this a blind spot for me here? Because I feel like because I'm in position with the suited, well, it's only ace-10 though. I think this is the same question as the last one, where our hand needs to be a little bit stronger, maybe even ace-jack suited, but definitely ace-queen suited as a call. Yeah, I think it's a fold. Normal player. He's just going to have aces too often. Yeah. Yeah. That's basically the same question, but you're in position facing a stronger range to begin with. You know, the last question, you were on the button with ace-queen suited versus a looser range in a later position, which is already a wider range, standard. Under the gun is a tighter range, standard. And then a normal player is going to only have a tight 4-betting range, so you can just give this one up. Yeah. Cool. Oh, look at that. We completed the pre-flop section. Yay. We can mark it as complete. And then let's go back to the courses, make sure that it all got marked. All right, we made it through pre-flop with more than 60 big blinds. Very nicely done. Did it in 6 sessions. Where is it? Got through pre-flop more than 60 big blinds in 6 sessions. All this material. And I know that because I've been using this daily thumb and changing the numbers of what episode it is and what part it is. And this will be part 6 today when I make the new one. So the next section I'm going to have a new thumbnail for, and it'll be for the pre-flop with more than 6, or sorry, it'll be the pre-flop with 35 to 60 big blinds. That'll be the next section we go through. 8 topics in that one. And remember, we're still just working on pre-flop. So if you want to, if you want to see this section, go to this thumbnail in order, and I'm going to make another thumbnail for the next section. And yeah, and that's how I'm kind of grouping them together. Cool. So great stream. I do have some things to do today. I don't believe I'm going to be back to play. If I am, it's going to be very late tonight, around 9 or 10 o'clock Vegas time. And that's only if there's a flight for the 100K running, just because that'll be a 4.5 hour tournament that'll allow me to get into Sunday's 100K. Other than that, I'm not going to really be playing. Maybe some cash later, but I kind of really doubt that too. Unfortunately, my Aunt Ida passed away at 98 years old 2 days ago. So before I started the stream, I was at the Zoom funeral with the rest of my family. She was a great lady. She was really, very active all the way up to the end. Like 98 years, and she, golfed constantly and danced constantly and all like that. And up until the last 2 weeks of her life, she would have ran circles around most people I know. And real special lady. So we're just kind of remembering her. And we have to go to the Shiva Zoom meeting later, which, if you don't know, that's basically Jews. It's like a post-funeral wake, I guess, for Jews, where you kind of bring the grieving family food, and you all kind of hang around, and and just kind of remember the person. So I'm gonna do that. That's a big family thing today. So no poker, most likely. If I do come back, I'll stream it. I'll let you guys know. And yeah, otherwise we'll see you tomorrow at what is that, about noon on Tuesday, Vegas time, and we'll start the pre-flop 35 to 60 big blind section. Much different than having more than 60 big blinds. I'm not going to host anybody. You guys can find somebody, and keep an eye on the YouTube. The new Jedi mind trick is probably going to come out late tonight. It's going to be the Jedi Archives. It's going to be a long video, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And make sure you follow the YouTube and turn on the notifications. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.